Are you ready to uncover your retirement solution? Learn more as Jeremy Keil and his guests guide you along the path of retirement and reveal the 5 steps you need to take to solve your retirement puzzle. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to Retirement Revealed with Jeremy Keil. Today we're going to hit part 3 of a 5-part series, and part 3 is called Need. And I know that if you haven't heard the first 2 parts, I'm going to ask Jeremy to review all 5 pieces of this that we're going to be covering in a 5-part series of podcasts. And we took a break last time, and it was very, very important to do so because Jeremy talked about Social Security, and it was fantastic. But now we're getting back on track with these 5 pieces. Good morning, Jeremy. How are you?
Doing well, Eric. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And I know this is a 5-part series. I know that this is part 3, but I don't remember all 5. Can you remind us what all 5 parts are?
Sure. Well, you should go to our website, keilfp.com, and find all 5 of those. So that'd be a good place to start for everybody.
All right.
But what we like to do is help you get ready for retirement. And we think this is so important that we've developed a process over the years on how you can make decisions in a certain sequence of orders so that it helps you make the best decisions for your retirement.
Mm-hmm.
So the first part is spending. Instead of focusing on your investments and things like that, you got to focus on how much you're going to spend in retirement.
Okay.
The next step is looking at how much are you going to make in retirement. Just because you stopped working doesn't mean you stop making money in retirement. Yeah, you got things like pensions, annuities, Social Security. There's different things that might come into play there. This one right here is the third one. This is talking about what do you need, which is what do you need to make up that gap between what you're spending and what you're making, right? Chances are whatever you're making is not going to be enough. So you need to make up that gap somehow. And the future ones we'll talk about is how much do you want in your future, talking about your future money, and then what do you leave behind? That's the 5th step there.
Gotcha. All right.
So we're on step number 3, figuring out what do you need to make up that gap between what you are spending and what you're making in retirement.
So is there normally a gap?
But we see that most of the time. That's the whole reason that people are saving in their 401k, saving outside of those areas.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like the good old days where you worked a nice job and then you retired early, you got a nice pension, and all you needed was your pension and maybe the interest off your bank account money.
Yeah.
That just doesn't seem to work out anymore.
No, the 40 years in a gold watch just doesn't happen anymore. I mean, not normally.
Yeah, right, exactly it. And even then, you might be married and you might have 2 different times that you're retiring. You might have gone through in the last step and decided that even though you'll get enough from your Social Security or your pension, you made a decision to wait a few years so that you could get more later on. Mm-hmm. And we don't think that you should wait for your Social Security and pension and then live in the poorhouse for those 2, 3, 4 years that you're waiting. We think you need some money, so this is that difference. Perhaps this gap is only a short-term, a temporary thing before later on your pension and Social Security shows up.
Yeah, that's a really good point because you've spoken, especially on the last podcast, that you can delay taking Social Security for a couple of years and you actually make more for each month even that you delay taking your Social Security. So the longer you wait, the more money you make, which is, I didn't mean to rhyme that, but it kind of was natural.
Yeah, it worked out. It worked out. And that could be the right thing for you.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, oh, I need to take my Social Security. I need to take my pension. No, you need the income.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be better for you to wait. And when you need the income, it's got to come from somewhere. And this is what we're talking about. What do you need to make up that difference for however long that might be?
Yeah. All right. I'm excited to get into this. Let's figure out how to fill the gap.
Yeah, you got it. And you said the word monthly a little bit ago. A lot of times we're used to getting money on a paycheck every 2 weeks, maybe twice a month. It seems like when you flip over to retirement, it turns into a monthly situation. Your pension shows up once a month. Your Social Security shows up once a month. So oftentimes when you're taking money out of your investments, you end up taking that out on a monthly basis. It's kind of like your new paycheck schedule is a once a month then from these different areas.
Gotcha. All right.
Yeah.
That can take some discipline too to change.
Well, yeah, it takes a little bit of discipline, but at the same time, we're trying to get it as close as possible to where it was before. So instead of taking money out for the entire year, letting it sit in your savings and then taking it out of your savings every single month, it is nice to get into that regular habit. So your regular habit before was every 2 weeks. Now it's still a regular habit, but maybe it's once a month.
Or maybe you could stagger it. So if you're getting a Social Security check, you know when that's coming, and then you take your retirement check 2 weeks after that, and then you're on a schedule for every 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, you're right on. A lot of times the pensions might pay out on the first of the month. So people will ask us to pay out their account money, their investment money on the 15th or 20th. A lot of times Social Security, well, that'll come either the second, third, or fourth Wednesday of every month. So that's kind of towards the middle or later half.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's your regular cadence, then maybe you take your investments on the first of the month. Maybe that's what works out better for you.
Yeah, nice.
Exactly. Well, a lot of times we talked about investments earlier. A lot of times people are relying on their investments for their retirement income. Seems like a lot of people that call themselves investment advisors are talking about that, where, okay, you're invested for the long term, go with the stock market that usually works out for the best. And that usually word doesn't really sit well with me. It doesn't usually sit well with a lot of retirees. And it's great. The stock market is great for the long term type of money, but we're talking about short term. If you need money next month, next year, next couple of years, how much do you really want to be relying on that type of money that might not be up that month?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We were just looking at some statistics, and that the stock market's up about 53% of the days, right? So it's kind of like a coin flip. The market's up 53% of the days. On a monthly basis, it's up 63% of the months. So if you need money out every single month and the market's down 37% of the time, that's what the history showed over the last 90 years. I don't know if you really want to rely on that, on something that's going to be up, that's going to be better than it was last month, only 2/3 of the time. Yeah. So we like to keep the stock market still in the long run. And the only way to keep the stock market in the long run is to set aside some money for the short run. And that's what we're talking about today, is how much should you have set aside for the short run to make up that gap, to make up that difference between what you're spending and what you'll be making in retirement.
All right. And it's obviously individualized, right? So you work with each client individually because everybody has different needs.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you approach this conversation with them and start to work through this?
Well, that's why we get to this third. The first part is figuring out how much money do you need to spend. You might spend more for health insurance the first few years. You might be making less the first few years because you've waited on your pension or Social Security. You might be making more the first few years because maybe one of you retired, but the other one's still bringing in a salary.
Okay.
So we like to project out through your lifetime, what does your spending level look like? And then project out through your lifetime, what does your income level look like? So you can see on a year-to-year basis, what is that gap? What's that gap? The software we like to use shows it in the red. So kind of what's that red amount that we have to take out from the investments?
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah. And the other part too is some people say, well, what's the percentage I should have out of the stock market? How much money should I have in the bank? We don't like to think of it in terms of percentages or dollar amounts. We think you're better off referring to it or making decisions on this based on years of, do you want to have the next 1 to 2 years of your income set aside out of the market? Do you want to have the next 3 to 5 years of your income set aside out of the market? Decide how comfortable you are with allowing your long-term money to stay long-term, with the chances that maybe you do have to take some money out of the market when it's lower, and think of it more of a year's situation of, you know what, if I don't have to touch this money in the market for 5 years, I feel comfortable with that. Or I like the stock market. I want to make a little bit more if I can. So I don't want to have more over there, but I do want to have maybe 1 or 2 years set aside in the short run. So think through how much risk you want to take in a way, if you want to have a really big short term or if you want to have a smaller short term. And a lot of times you'll be looking at that chart of, here's what I make, here's what I need. And you might see a really big point, like, oh, I'm waiting for 3 years on Social Security. Well, maybe that's your answer. Maybe that's the answer, is you wait 3 years on Social Security. So you set aside those first 3 years in shorter term interest rate type of investments that you can rely upon, because you know in 3 years you'll have Social Security to rely upon for that money.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So definitely individualize, but it's a similar process, because that's how you go through and find the best answers for folks, is just seeing those differences and deciding how conservative you want to be, which means you've got a long, short run, or how aggressive you want to be, which means you have a short run.
Got it. All right.
Yeah. A lot of people are asking us, when do I start doing this? When does my money go from being long run, kind of pre-retirement to retirement type of money? And our answer is that it's usually about 5 to 10 years ahead of time. We saw this one company, they put out some ads talking about the retirement red zone. Forget the company, but that's a great phrase. And what they were talking about is that the first 5 years before your retirement and your first 5 years into retirement are a really big deal. If the stock market happens to be horrible for those 10 years or happens to be great for those 10 years, that'll make a huge difference for you. You can't really control what the market's doing.
Mm-hmm.
You can control a little bit about your retirement date, but you can't control what the market's doing the first 5 years before you retire and the first 5 years after you retire. So that's our encouragement is as you're approaching retirement, perhaps you need to start thinking about how do we bring down our risk. And the way that we suggest doing it is to ignore what a lot of the financial magazines will say. They'll come up with stuff with like take 100 minus your age, and that's how much you should have in the stock market, right? If you're 60 years old and 100 minus 60 is 40, you should have 40% in the stock market. Our encouragement is think of this more like years. Don't go with this formula that's supposed to fit everybody, because if it's fitting everybody, it's fitting nobody.
Exactly.
And the way to fit you is to look through and say, well, going into retirement, is the market up? Is it down? If it's up and you're 7 to 10 years away from retirement, maybe you start pulling some money out of the market, start setting aside years of savings. So we don't think it's the best choice to say, well, I've got a certain level of risk. Let me just bring the whole thing down. We think it's a better choice to say, oh, well, those first 2 years of retirement, I need maybe, let's just call it 40 grand a year. Those first 2 years is 40 grand a year. So perhaps when the market's up and you find some times when there's some profit there, perhaps you start shaving off some of that profit and setting it aside in some interest rate type of accounts. So you get to the point and say, well, I've got my first 2 years covered. And then you feel more comfortable retiring, knowing that if the market's down, I've got the first 2 years retired of my retirement money coming on out. It's ready to go. It doesn't have anything to do with the stock market at that point in time.
And so, what that also does is it allows the market to rebound a little bit, maybe, right? So if it does go down in the first year that you're retired or right before you retire, you have that money set aside. You're able to live off of that. And over those next 2 years, hopefully that market starts to rebound and come back up. So you're not taking out, I guess what they say, selling low and buying high, which a lot of people do when they try to time the market. This allows you some flexibility. And even if you're saying I need 40,000 a year, so you've got 80,000 set aside for those 2 years. If you see that the market is going down and that economy is getting a little bit worse, you can tighten the belt a little bit if you need to. I mean, you don't have to, but being able to say, you know what, now I want this to last 2.5 years instead of just 2 years. Maybe I'm not going to go out to eat as much, or maybe I'm not going to do this trip that I thought I would do at this point. I'm going to wait for a little bit to see how things play out. But it gives you a ton of flexibility and I think a lot of peace.
Yeah, gives you flexibility, gives you time. When you're 30, 40, 50, they say, oh, you're investing for the long run. Well, we think you still have a long run when you hit retirement. We mentioned earlier in a previous episode that if you retire at 62 and there's two of you, on average, your money ought to last for 30 years. Wow. Pretty sure 30 years is long run type of money.
Yeah.
The issue is that you went from having a long run to having a long run and a short run. And it is incredibly important to decide for you how long is your short run. And if that's the right number for you, if it's 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever it happens to be, make sure you carve out that money out of the stock market. So whatever it is for your short run that you're planning on, you don't have to rely on the stock market. You can let your long run money actually be long run if you're using it 5 years, 10 years from now. It's not long run if you're using it 5 weeks or 10 months from now.
Yeah, exactly.
Other part of this that's important too is you kind of think of the standard retirement recommendations. I don't know if you've heard of this 4% rule idea.
Oh, what's that?
Yeah, it came up with like 30 years ago, but the idea is maybe all you need to do is just take out 4% of your money each year, and you'll be able to keep up with the ups and downs of the stock market.
Gotcha.
That sounds nice, but I haven't met anyone that spent 30 years in retirement and spent the exact same dollar amount at the beginning as at the end, where there's no fluctuations, where their taxes didn't go up and down, or their healthcare costs didn't go up and down. So it looks nice on paper, where you've got this smooth, you retire and you get your pension. It just goes from the day you start to the day you're gone.
Mhm.
You get your Social Security, it goes from the day you start to the day you're gone. You take out your 4% from the day you start to the day you're gone. And it doesn't quite match up with reality, especially for a lot of people that retire before 65. If you
Mhm.
retire before 65, you can't get Medicare yet, which means you've got to figure out your health insurance. And a
Mhm.
lot of times those health insurance costs are higher than when you were having it subsidized by your corporation, right? When you are working, a lot of times your company's helping you pay for the cost.
Yeah,
Real
exactly.
quick on that, a lot of times people get into this Cobra situation. They say Cobra is so expensive. No, it's not. It's exactly what it cost when you were working. It just seems that way because you were paying 10, 20, 30% of the cost and somebody else is paying the difference.
Yeah.
When you get on Cobra, you're paying the full bill. It's not that it got expensive all of a sudden. It's just that nobody's subsidizing you.
Yeah, nobody's
So
paying
there's
for you.
yeah, that's exactly it. And there's a lot of times there's this difference between when the company's helping you out when you're working and then you retire and maybe you don't have any health insurance outside of what you got to buy on your own until
Mhm.
you're 65 when all of a sudden the government starts helping you out.
Yeah.
So if you got nobody helping you out and you want to retire early, it's probably going to cost you more for health insurance those first few years, whatever that dollar amount is. And similar to our idea earlier of just because you're waiting on Social Security doesn't mean you live in the poorhouse until you do that. Just because you've got some extra costs for those first few years doesn't mean you have to live on less, right? If
Mhm.
you've decided that I need 80 grand a year, say, for retirement, but my insurance is going to cost me 10 grand more a year, well, maybe just plug it in and realize that those first 3, 4 years, it'll cost you that dollar amount, cost you a high amount, knowing that later on it won't be costing you that higher dollar amount. So if you got this expense, whatever it might be, maybe it's extra health insurance cost, maybe the expense is that you're paying off your mortgage. You might still have a mortgage. Hopefully that doesn't last for your whole retirement, but we do see a lot of times the first few years, people are paying their mortgage, maybe even extra into the mortgage.
Mhm.
If that's money you need for the first few years, you got to take that out and make sure it's set aside in a place that you can rely upon.
Yeah. Jeremy, you've I mean, there's a lot of ideas in this one topic, and you've given a lot of tips, but I'm hoping that you'll bring it all back around and kind of put it all together with how do you do this? How does somebody do this, and how do you specifically help your clients do this? Putting all the tips that you've already kind of talked about in order and kind of helping them out.
Yeah, you got it. It's going through and figuring out how much are you going to be spending in retirement, and like we just mentioned, it's going to go up and down. You
Mhm.
might have more spending in the beginning points. You might have less spending later on, and it's figuring out how much will you be making in retirement. You might have more or less at different times, but you'll see a difference. You'll see that gap between what you're spending, what you're making. That's the amount you need to be taking out from your investments. And in our opinion, if you're looking at your short run money, you got to take that money out of the stock market, put it into some place, whatever it might be for you, that you can rely upon. It's usually more short term interest rate money. So step one is figure out what's that gap. Step two is figure out how many years of the set aside money do you feel comfortable with. Would you rather have 1 to 2 years of money set aside? Would you rather have 5 to 7 years of money set aside? Real quick on there is that a lot of times it's the beginning part of retirement that's a bigger deal. So you may want to have a little bit more set aside at the beginning part of retirement than you do later on.
Mhm.
Because later on, guess what? You made it. The stock market is a big deal if it drops at the beginning of your retirement. It's less of a big deal if it drops at the end of your retirement. So perhaps at the beginning of retirement, when it's the riskiest financial time of your life, maybe you counteract that by being a little bit more conservative than you normally would be. And once you made it a few years, perhaps you can dial down that short run and rely a little bit more on your long run area.
Jeremy, one of the things that I keep thinking about also is, like we said before, you set aside some extra money on the front end in case the market does something a little funky. But the other piece is that I think that most people, and this is human nature, and I think I think that everybody wants to in a way, but when you first retire, I think that's the time that you're like, you know what? Now I want to travel someplace. Now I want to go do something. Now I want to take that special trip that I've been waiting on. And let's be honest, the things that are going to increase later in your retirement years are probably going to be some healthcare issues because as we
Mhm.
age, I'm not that old and I'm already on a pretty good Tylenol ibuprofen regimen because of certain things that
Mhm.
I've been doing
Mhm.
through the years. But it may be that time to say, you know what, I do want to celebrate my retirement, and the wife and I, or the husband and I, we're going to go and do this trip, and we're going to have some fun. And those are the years that you're going to be more active in retirement. You may slow down a little bit later, but having that extra, and then being able to, like you said, be in touch with your financial advisor. I don't think everybody should be watching the market, because that causes stress. But be in touch with your financial advisor. Say, hey, this is what we want to do. How does it look? Are we good to go? And Jeremy, I know you have that conversation with your clients because they rely on you to be able to say, hey, you've set this up really well. You know what? Enjoy yourself. Italy's beautiful. Have fun.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And if you are planning for that and that's an upcoming expense, you got to have that money set aside so you don't tell your wife or your spouse, yeah, sorry, honey, we can't do that trip because the stock market dropped 20%. Yeah. If it's coming up and it's in your short run time frame and the market's higher, maybe it's a good time to take some profit, throw it into the area that you've got set aside for the short run so that you can enjoy it more, not worry about what the market's doing on a day-to-day basis, because you've got your day-to-day covered by the money that you're making or the money that you set aside for your next month, next year, whatever it happens to be for these amounts that you'll be taking out.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's we're over the hump. We're halfway there.
Yeah, we are. So this was number 3. Remind us again what number 4 and 5 are.
Yeah, number 4 is talking about what do you want, right? If you need some money next month, you probably want to have some money in the future, and that is your long-term type of money. So it's how do you decide what you do with that long-term money? How do you set that on up? And then the last part is what do you leave behind? We like to say you either leave behind some money or you leave behind some bills, and it's important to figure out and be prepared for either one of those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think that everybody's in a different stage of life. One of the things that kind of popped in my head while we were talking is some people may have bought a house a little bit later in life, and so they still will have a mortgage for the first year or two that they're in retirement. And that's something else that they can look forward to, is that once they stop paying that mortgage, that's almost like an extra paycheck coming in. If they're paying $1,500 a month, 2 years into retirement, when that mortgage is paid off, woohoo, there's an extra $1,500 a month that's now can be allocated for something else. So that's exciting.
Plan for it. Just be ready for it. You know what's coming up.
Yep, absolutely. And part of planning for it is speaking with a professional. And so as you're listening to these podcasts, Jeremy is very knowledgeable. His team is amazing. Don't just take what we say and run with it and say, hey, this is what they advised, because that's not what we did. We're telling you this information because this is information everybody needs to hear, but you need to talk to a professional, and Jeremy is the constant professional. So Jeremy, if they want to get a hold of you, how do they reach you? Yeah,
check us out online at Keil FP for the KeilFinancialPartners.com. So KeilFP.com, or give us a call. It's 262-333-8353. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Fantastic, brother. I love spending time with you on these podcasts. I learned so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Eric.
You bet. And thank you all for listening to the Retirement Revealed podcast with Jeremy Keil. Please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Jeremy comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks so much for listening today. For everyone at Keil Financial Partners, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Retirement Revealed podcast. Click on the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit retirement-revealed.com to learn more. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Keil Financial Partners. Keil Financial Partners does not provide legal, accounting, or tax advice. Consult your attorney or tax professional. Representatives have general knowledge of the Social Security tenets. For complete details on your situation, contact the Social Security Administration. Keil Financial Partners is a part of the Thrivent Advisor Network, a registered investment advisor. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.